My name is Elena Marsh, and for 28 years, I was the daughter nobody noticed. Not because I did anything wrong. I got good grades. I worked 2 jobs through college. I never asked my parents for money, never caused a scene, never gave them a single reason to be ashamed of me. And still, every single time I walked into a room, my mother's eyes drifted past me to find my older sister, Priya. Priya was the golden child. Priya got the piano lessons, the summer trips to Europe, the brand new car on her 18th birthday. When Priya brought home a B-, my parents took her out for ice cream to cheer her up. When I brought home a full scholarship offer to study accounting, my father glanced at the letter, nodded once, and asked if dinner was ready. I stopped expecting anything from them a long time ago. I built my own life instead. A small apartment I paid for myself, a steady job at a mid-sized firm, and eventually, a life alongside a man named Daniel. Daniel was quiet, unshowy. He wore the same 3 flannel shirts on rotation and drove a car that rattled a little on the highway. He worked long hours at some company downtown, always vague about the details, always more interested in asking about my day than talking about his own. My mother met him exactly twice before the wedding and, both times, made sure I knew what she thought. "He seems fine," she said the first time in the tone people use for weather they don't like. "A little plain, don't you think? Priya's Marcus drives a Tesla." I didn't argue. I never argued with my mother. I had learned over almost 3 decades that arguing only fed her, gave her more reasons to compare, more ammunition to remind me that I would always be the daughter who settled, while Priya was the daughter who arrived. So when Daniel proposed, kneeling in the kitchen of my tiny apartment with a modest ring he'd clearly saved a long time for, I said yes without a second of hesitation. And when I told my parents, my mother's response was the sentence that would echo through every single day of our engagement. "Oh," she said, barely looking up from her phone. "That's nice. I suppose you'll have your little party then." A little party, that's what they called it. Not a wedding. Not our wedding. A little party the way you'd describe a child's backyard birthday with balloons and juice boxes. They didn't offer a cent toward it. Not the venue, not the flowers, not even a contribution toward my dress. Meanwhile, 2 months into our engagement, Priya announced hers, to Marcus, a man who worked in finance and never let a conversation pass without mentioning his bonus. My parents transformed overnight. Suddenly there were spreadsheets on the kitchen table. Suddenly there were tasting appointments at 5-star hotels, a budget that made my eyes widen when I caught a glimpse of it, and a guest list 200 names long. "We only get to do this once properly," my mother said, not realizing it, or not caring, that I was standing right there holding a stack of napkins I'd bought for my own reception with my own money. They didn't offer to help me plan a single thing. My mother forgot 3 separate times to send out invitations to extended family on my father's side. When my aunt called to ask why she hadn't heard anything, my mother simply said, "Oh, it's a small thing, really. You don't need to make the trip." I planned my wedding with my own hands and my own savings alongside Daniel, who never once complained about the modest budget we had. If anything, he seemed relieved by it. "I don't need anything big," he told me one night, running his thumb along my knuckles. "I just need you there, and the people who actually love us. That's the whole wedding, as far as I'm concerned." I believed him. I loved him more for it. What I didn't know, what neither of us discussed, not because we were hiding some grand secret from each other, but because it simply never came up in the way you'd expect, was exactly how much weight sat behind those quiet words of his. 6 months before the wedding, Daniel's uncle passed away. I remember the funeral, remember holding his hand in the pew, remember him being unusually still for days afterward. I assumed it was simple grief. What I didn't fully register, because Daniel mentioned it once, briefly, almost apologetically, like he was embarrassed by it, was that his uncle had built a mid-sized logistics and manufacturing company from nothing over 30 years, and that Daniel, his only living relative with any interest in the business, had quietly begun stepping into the role his uncle had spent a lifetime building. Around the same time, that company merged with a much larger firm, one that, as it happened, my own father worked for as a regional operations manager. I didn't put the 2 things together. Why would I? Daniel never talked about work in specifics. He came home tired some nights, energized on others, always changed out of whatever he'd worn that day and back into his soft, worn-out flannel before I even saw him. He never wore a suit around me, never mentioned board meetings or shareholders or the small mountain of decisions now resting on his shoulders. "Why don't you talk about your job more?" I asked him once, half joking, as we ate cheap noodles on our couch. He shrugged. "Because when I'm with you, I don't want to be that person. I just want to be Daniel." I thought it was sweet. I didn't think it was strategy. Later, I would understand it was both. The morning of the wedding, my mother texted me, "Running a little behind. Don't worry, we'll make it eventually. It's not like it's a real ceremony people are waiting on." I read that message standing in my getting ready suite, in a dress I'd altered myself because I couldn't afford the shop's fitting fee, and I felt something in me that had been bending quietly for 28 years simply go still. Not break, just go still. The way water goes still, right before it freezes. My parents arrived 40 minutes late, in the same clothes they might have worn to a Tuesday lunch. My mother wore sneakers. My father didn't bother with a tie. They breezed past Daniel's parents, a soft-spoken retired schoolteacher and a man who'd worked in maintenance his whole life, with the thinnest possible nod, as if greeting them warmly might somehow validate the marriage they'd spent a year quietly disapproving of. "It's a cute little venue," my mother said to a cousin, loud enough for several people to hear. "Very intimate. Not everyone needs the big production, I suppose." I heard a whisper behind me, one of my father's co-workers, I think, murmuring to his wife that I'd married beneath myself. I didn't turn around. I had promised myself I would get through this day with my chin up, regardless of what anyone said, because the only two opinions that mattered to me were standing at that altar with me, Daniel's and my own. The ceremony was small, warm, and, despite everything, beautiful. Daniel cried when he saw me, actually cried unashamed in front of everyone, and for a moment I forgot every unkind word my mother had ever said. Then the reception began, and everything changed. We heard the cars before we saw them, a low, rich hum of engines pulling into the gravel lot outside the venue. Not one or two, but a slow procession of them. Black town cars, a silver Bentley. Someone's driver stepped out first and opened a rear door with the kind of practiced formality you don't see at little parties. Guests began turning in their seats. My mother, mid-bite of appetizer, actually stood up to look. Men and women in impeccably tailored suits began filing into the room. People who moved like they were used to rooms rearranging themselves around their presence. A local judge I recognized from the news. 2 city council members. A cluster of executives whose faces I'd seen in industry write-ups my father occasionally left lying around the house, always talking about how powerful these people were, how untouchable. My father went pale before I even understood why. Because the last car to arrive was the company car. The one attached, I would later learn, to the CEO's office of the very company my father had worked beneath for 11 years. Mr. Harrington stepped out. 60-something, silver-haired, the kind of presence that made an entire room quiet without him raising his voice. I watched my father physically shrink in his seat as the man crossed the reception hall. Not toward my parents, not toward the judge, not toward anyone important looking at all. He walked straight to Daniel. "Sir," Mr. Harrington said, extending a hand and smiling with genuine warmth. "Congratulations. It's an honor to finally see you married. We're all thrilled to be working under your leadership. The merger's gone smoother than any of us expected, and frankly, that's because of you." The room went silent in that particular way rooms do when 200 people realize, all at once, that they've badly misjudged something. My father's fork clattered against his plate. I watched the understanding move across my parents' faces in stages. First confusion, then disbelief. Then, as Mr. Harrington continued speaking, mentioning the new CEO and Daniel's vision for the company, in the same breath. Pure, unfiltered horror. My father worked for Daniel, my husband, the man they had spent a year calling plain, comparing unfavorably to Marcus and his Tesla, treating as an afterthought not worth a real wedding, was now, by virtue of inheritance and a merger nobody outside the boardroom had been told about yet, the man who signed off on my father's department budget. Priya's fiancé, Marcus, who had spent the cocktail hour loudly discussing his year-end bonus to anyone who'd listen, went noticeably quiet. I watched him recalculate, in real time, exactly how far beneath Daniel he now stood. Mr. Harrington turned to me next, taking my hand between both of his. "And you must be the reason he's smiled more in the last year than in the 5 before it combined. He talks about you constantly, you know. Never about the money, never about the company, always about you and about how much he respects where you came from. He told me once that family isn't about who claps loudest for you. It's about who stays." I felt tears come up fast and unexpected. Not from him. I already knew that about Daniel. But hearing it said out loud, in front of the very people who had spent a year insisting my husband wasn't good enough, felt like something finally settling into place. My mother tried to laugh it off, a bright, brittle sound. "Well, isn't that lovely?" she said, already moving toward Daniel with her arms half raised for an embrace she hadn't offered all day. Our son-in-law. We're so proud. Relatives who, an hour earlier, had whispered about me marrying beneath myself now murmured different things entirely, about how convenient my parents' sudden warmth looked, about how transparent they'd become. I heard my aunt, the one my mother had forgotten to formally invite, mutter just loud enough. Now she remembers she has a daughter. My father found me near the gift table an hour later, his tie finally on. He must have kept a spare in the car, his face gray with something I'd never seen on him before. Shame, maybe, or fear of professional consequence, which for a man like my father may have amounted to the same thing. "Elena," he said quietly, "I didn't know. If we'd known, we would have..." "Would have what?" I asked, and I was surprised by how calm my own voice sounded. "Come to more planning meetings? Paid for a florist? Told your coworkers about your daughter's little party with a straight face?" He didn't answer. There wasn't an answer that wouldn't confirm exactly what we both already knew. My mother arrived next, eyes wet, asking if we could get a family photo. "Just a nice one for the mantle." I looked at her for a long moment at the woman who had spent 28 years finding new ways to look past me, and I said the only thing that felt true. "You can take a photo with the guests, Mom. I'm not going to perform a family we don't have, just because the room finally noticed who I married." She cried. I didn't stop her. I also didn't take the photo. Later that night, during the toasts, Daniel stood, tapped his glass, and thanked our guests. Daniel's college roommate who'd driven 6 hours to be there, my own boss who'd quietly covered part of the catering bill without ever mentioning it, the elderly neighbor who used to leave soup on my doorstep during finals week, the mentor who'd given Daniel his first real job before any of this. He thanked his parents. He thanked mine. No, he didn't. He looked briefly toward my parents' table and then simply moved past it, without malice, without a scene, the way you'd walk past a door that was never really open to begin with. "Elena's chosen family got her here," he said instead. "Not the people who share her blood, necessarily, but the people who showed up. That's the family that matters, and starting tonight, we're going to build something in its honor." He announced a scholarship fund, right there, for first-generation college students from working families, the kind of support neither of us had ever really been given by the people who were supposed to give it freely. The applause that followed was the loudest sound of the entire day. My parents left not long after, quietly, without the fanfare they'd arrived without either. My father, I heard later, faced an uncomfortable number of questions back at the office the following Monday. Co-workers who'd overheard the exchange at the wedding wanted to know exactly how well he actually knew the new CEO's family. He didn't have a good answer. Daniel and I began our marriage the way we meant to continue it, surrounded by people who had chosen us before they knew what, if anything, we could offer them in return. Not by wealth, not by status, just by two people who paid attention long before anyone told them they should. I think about my mother's words sometimes, unprompted, in quiet moments. A little party. She meant it as an insult. In the end, it became something else entirely. A small, ordinary phrase that revealed exactly how little she'd ever really seen me. Respect was never about the cars in the parking lot or the title on somebody's business card. It was about how you treated a person before you knew what they were worth on paper. My parents learned that lesson far too late to matter. I learned it in time to build a life without them.